So as we're working our way through Exodus, I thought we'd be going quicker at this point, but it seems like that the details of this seem to matter from what the Lord's speaking to us. So we're really in part 4 of the civil laws that are given. Again, this is given to Israel. How does this work? It works as God being their king and judges over tens, over hundreds, over thousands. But when people look at this and say, well, this is bizarre, you say it was never meant for modern day. However, our forefathers who established our country very much used these very passages, especially in our judicial system, because it did indeed give a very good fairness and justice on a number of different issues. And again, at this time, things were spread out in other countries so differently on how things were given. Now, there was a lot of them, as we mentioned, that were very similar, but there were most of them that were very, very different. And so this is 3,500 years ago, and I do think that God's heart of justice and fairness and personal responsibility and discernment and all of these things do come out. So as we jump into verse 1 through 4 here, if a man steals an ox or a sheep, or slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 for the oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. Now, if the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for the bloodshed. It's seen as self-defense, right? If the sun has risen, though, it's daytime now on that same thief, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. He should make full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it's an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall restore double. So again, the way it's worded, it's not worded in a Western chronological layout like we like and are used to. But to be honest with you, if you read through law books before, they're very confusing because they have all these notes under notes under notes under notes, and it really is. It's debatable sometimes on which part goes with which part of what they're talking about, and the same here. So let's break it down a little bit. First, he's basically now elaborating on the part of the 10 Commandments that says, thou shalt not steal, right? From Exodus 20. So now he's laying out and elaborating more specifics, and he's sort of giving hypotheticals. So he's saying, okay, hypothetically, an ox. Now, an ox was the largest animal that they knew of. Now, there were horses for the real rich, super rich, but Israel didn't have horses for the most part. And later on, interesting, before kings were even really laid out, God's told them, do not multiply horses or chariots to yourself, lest you say, look at my power. Remember that? They didn't really even have horses at that time. But yet God did not want them to have a lot of horses, especially for the military. So oxen were pretty much it for the farmer. But you got to realize that was how he plowed his field. That's how he moved heavy stuff around. Without an ox, he was pretty well stuck. So when you steal a man's ox, you're really stealing his ability for his livelihood, which was predominantly at this time farming. Whereas you steal a sheep, guy may only have one sheep too, but it's not, even though it's valuable, it doesn't stop him from farming. And so again here, this is sort of the idea of why there's 5-1 with the ox and 4-1 with the sheep. because the ox had greater practical value and was much more important to the farmer. So that's the principle. That's sort of the hypothetical principle. Now you could take it and utilize it. So a guy steals his plow. Well, that would sort of be like stealing an ox, right? Or the guy stole one of his rakes. Well, again, it doesn't stop him because he has other rakes, but nevertheless, it's valuable to him. So this is the concept, the idea that's going on here. And again, this is for the judges predominantly. I mean, people can be a part of the process of the legal system, and we'll see some more in a minute. But this is basically, if it's laid in the lap of the judges, the people know, and the judge knows. And so together, they can have a sense of how things were to be laid out. Now, last week, especially you guys out there who are listening online, we had a great discussion afterwards when Jenny brought up, why are we studying this boring stuff? Which I don't disagree with whatsoever. And we basically said, Kirk and Dennis are making me, the elders of the church here, are forcing this on me. No. Yeah, it's all God's word. It's not equally as important as the Sermon on the Mount, but nevertheless, we do see the nature of God, the heart of God, and all the scripture is good and profitable for the man of God, that he can be thoroughly equipped for every good work. Now, it's interesting that as a very young pastor, and I had a very young church, I was 24, 25 years old, and sure enough, there were some young people who had similar problems as we're going to talk about here tonight, and I had no idea. And there was a pastor, an elderly retired pastor, and his wife, and as this person was conveying what went on, the elder pastor said, well, here's what needs to happen. He needs to give restitution 4 times the amount. And I'm like, what? Where'd you come from, Mars? You know, I just, as a young pastor, I'd read this, I'd read the whole Bible, but I'd never really thought about the application of this. And he went to this passage, and he said, yeah, right here. And he read it, and it perfectly applied to that situation between 2 people within the church. But I'll tell you, at first, it really was shocking to me because I really didn't know this in detail. I mean, I knew it, but I hadn't really thought about applying it in the modern day church situation. And indeed, it does work. And hopefully, it keeps people from having hard hearts. It's not me as the judge of the church laying this on them. I'm saying, here's what the scripture says. Let's all obey it. And so the judges would then utilize this principle, if you would, sort of cut and paste it to their situation to understand the degree and proportion of the personal responsibility that each person bears in the situation. Now, the other thing is, if you'll notice in verse 4, it says, he shall restore it double. And you're going to hold on. It's not double. It says that 4 sheep and 5 oxen. That's not double. Understand the difference. In verse 1, it's the slaughtered or stolen sheep. And in verse 4, they find the animal. And the idea is the intent. That if you have slaughtered the cow and you've dispersed it up, or the sheep, or whatever it is, or you've sold it off and it's not in your hands and you can say, hey, I don't know anything about this. It shows that you're sort of a professional. And this is how you're making your living. By taking it quickly and getting rid of the evidence quickly. It's more than just, I'm starving and I need some food. It's actually sort of a professional. But if you find the sheep, it's again, this guy's not a professional. He just stole it. We track it down. We find it at his house. And he just needs to pay double because you found it. And again, the idea is the intent is that he took it because he was in great need, and his need outweighed his character, and therefore that was the end result of it. So fourfold or fivefold. It's interesting later when David had committed adultery. You guys remember this story in 2 Samuel 12? And he was just going through just personal dying inside, as we know from the Psalms. But after several months, finally Nathan came up and said, look, there's a guy in Bethlehem. I'm sure David's ears perked up because he grew up in Bethlehem. And he's a poor guy with one lamb. I know poor guys in Bethlehem that can only have one lamb. And the reason they only have one lamb typically is to keep it so they can take it and be sacrificed the one time a year. And so this old guy who only had one lamb had it in his house. It slept with him and ate right from his table, Nathan said. So it was a protected sheep. It had to become a pet that no doubt was going to become the sacrifice. But the rich guy across the street had somebody come in from out of town, and he went across and took the one sheep because he didn't want to kill one of his sheep, multiple sheep. And David says, well, we're going to kill that guy. And then we're going to make him pay back 4 sheep. So David sort of caught himself going, my heart says murder him, kill him. It's so unjust that this rich man took this one man, poor little lamb. And then when he couldn't back down from that, he's like, okay, 4 sheep. He has to repay 4 sheep. But Nathan said, you're the man. You had many wives, and Uriah had one special little lamb, Bathsheba, and you took her while he was out fighting your battle, and then David repented after that. But it's interesting, David knew 4 times the amount, even though he also wanted the death sentence on the guy. With this hypothetical story, it wasn't real. I mean, he fully believed it was real until Nathan said, no, it's not a real story, but it has revealed your heart. You're the man. And then also Zacchaeus, that wee little man tax collector. Remember him? He climbed up in a sycamore tree, and he heard the Lord, and he saw the Lord, and he said, hey, come to my house and eat. And Jesus at that meal, we don't know what he said, we don't know what happened, but he repented. And what did he say? Everybody that I have cheated, I'll pay back 4 times the amount to each one of them. So he understood this. It's interesting that Solomon, in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 31, says that if that thief has it found, so again, it's not slaughtered or killed, but even if it's found, it's not double, but he said 7-fold. Now, why did Solomon say 7-fold? Again, at this point, the kings are the kings. They can make up any laws they want. They can change any law they want. Because God's not the king ruling the nation. They're the king ruling the nation. So they can make up anything. They're the ultimate judge. I think probably it was because of the timing of the situation, in that, remember the days of Solomon, silver was as stones. It was a very wealthy society. And paying back 4 times the amount didn't have enough power in it to stop people from stealing. We've talked about this before, that there has to be a punishment that fits the crime, so to deter that crime or to stop that crime. And so evidently he's saying 7-fold seems better right now in this time at this place. But again, I would point out that it does seem that even though the judge is making the ultimate decision by what the witnesses are saying, that it sounds like the person who's been wronged does have a chance to speak for either an amount that seems right to them or mercy. And James points this out. In James chapter 2, verse 13, for judgment without mercy is to the one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. So especially if a person is stealing because he's starving, this is a great opportunity to show mercy and say, hey, not only do I not want to see this guy prosecuted for stealing, but I actually want to help him out. What's going on in your life? I can't get a job. Why? Well, let me give you a job and turn around and help that person out. But either way, it's got to be restored one way or another. Not jail time, not prison time. And we've talked about this, that our system today of jails and prisons is not biblical, but it just doesn't work. I mean, if you're a pragmatic individual, which we all should be, especially on the civil laws of things, if you go into prison, 85% of the people go back in prison for committing a worse crime than when they originally went in for. So it's really a college on how to be more of a criminal and to be meaner and to see man less respectfully than you did living in that prison, very harsh environment. And I ministered in the prison for 4 years as a chaplain. And I've seen guys come out of prison and even come to our church afterwards and stuff. And there's certain mentalities they got from prison. I don't know if it's impossible, they won't break them in this lifetime, but even guys that end up becoming leaders of my church, and even a few of them pastors of other churches, they still had some serious stinking thinking that was just sort of, seared into their brain from living in that very strange, harsh, brutal environment for so many years. Don't think it's a good idea at all. But if you look here, it's an immediate restoration. The guy has to take personal responsibility. I am guilty. I got to pay back 5 or 4. Now, if he didn't have the money, then he's got to be a servant, like we talked about before, an indentured servant. So it sounds like the original thing is that the judges say, okay, you don't have 4 sheep, you don't have 5 oxen. We're going to sell you as a servant for a 6-year stint to somebody else. And then the money they would get for selling that person into that 6-year prison sentence, so to speak, but as an indentured servant, is now given to the victim. Or I wonder, too, if the guy could say, okay, you can't give me, you come and work for me until you work off the value of 5 oxen or 4 sheep or donkeys or whatever it is he took. Again, just try to picture how much healthier that is. There's this sort of emotional healing, a spiritual healing that happens not just to the victim of the person who was wrong, but also to the person who's getting stopped in their tracks and are being forced to be responsible for their actions. That's a very harsh thing all young people learn, isn't it? We all at some point go, oh man, I broke that window. Dad told me 4 times not to play baseball over there, and we still did. And he said we're going to end up breaking a window, and I did. And now, I've got to pay for it. And the worst thing the parents could do is pay for it, right? It's important that they have to go talk to the neighbors. They've got to tell them that they broke it, and they've got to come up with a method to pay it. And if you as parents want to do that, then make them work it off or take some of their allowance money until it's paid off, or make them sell something of value, their Game Boy or whatever it is they have these days, PlayStation, and they sell it to have to pay for that window. Any of the above would be a moment of building character in their lives. But today, this new generation, they're victims. And every time they've got to face personal responsibility, it's, I'm a victim that somebody else should have to pay for my responsibility. I shouldn't have to, whatever it is. And to be honest with you, I think part and portion, it's why there is so much anxiety in these young people, so much depression in these young people, so much sense of no hope. It is, again, their mindsets, their philosophies are not true to life. They need to be true to life. And I think they know they're living out in a world that's not true to life, and it begins to damage. There is a philosopher, Peter Kreeft, and he wrote several books. He's a teacher at Notre Dame. But he came to the place where he would, leave his heated or air-conditioned house, take 2 steps into his garage, get into his heated, air-conditioned car, drive the 3 miles to the campus and park and, feel the cold or feel the heat for 2 minutes until he got into the building. And then he was in that building all day, and then to repeat. And he realized living in this world where he's just saying words and teaching philosophies and tests and all of this, it was literally emotionally destroying him. And he realized that he just needed to minimally walk back and forth. And he talks about that 3 miles. It was really 3 miles. He felt every foot of it. And when it was cold and he was slipping and sliding and freezing from the snow and the sleet, and it was real. It was all real. When he would step on a leaf and feel the crunch under his foot, every bit of that was healing to him because it was true to life. It was real. I walked 3 miles. To go to my work is 3 miles away, and I felt it was 3 miles away. It's snow and sleet and freezing, and I am feeling the freezing cold right down to my bones. And it was actually a very, very healthy thing for him. And he again was pointing out how we watch a TV show and the murder and the solving of the murder and going through court in 28 minutes, It's not true to life. And that a marriage and a divorce and all of these things can happen. And the reality of the pain of it is so minimized in our culture that it makes marriage less valuable or anything else that is not having the real consequence of it. So again, something like this where they're having to feel the full responsibility of this, it would be a life-changing moment in a child's life that wasn't raised properly. When I say raised properly, he could be raised in a millionaire's home. There's a guy going to court today for, he's a part of Antifa, and he injured some people. And he's going to court today, and he's a young boy in his 20s. He's dressed in a dress. He calls himself, he's gender fluid. His dad is a billionaire. And here he is, living in this unreal world. And he's dancing. He's got a parade of Antifa people, and he's dancing in this dress on the way to the courtroom as if it's all a big joke. And you realize it's like, okay, that kid was not raised in a healthy way. He does not understand. And maybe getting put in prison, which I don't believe in the prison system, but being in there for 4 years might wake things up or might be the thing that destroys him, which is more likely to happen. So again, I think right now the best thing for our country, just a side note, my 2 cents, is that every boy and girl 18 has to do 2 years in the military. And we need drill sergeants whose hands aren't tied behind their back. We need a real 1940s type boot camp and make these people feel the reality of life, whether it's getting up early or making their beds exactly the way it's supposed to or shining their shoes, whatever it is, that they come out of that with a a view of life that's true to life. And they can feel honorable. And they can feel accomplishments. And they are side by side with people, whether you come from a rich house or a poor house. I think that would be an incredibly healthy thing. Please don't vote for me for president. For the 100th time this week, no. Well, I think today, again, in our church, I think we need to utilize these principles in dealing with social issues within the church, especially if it comes from people being wronged or reparations. And Paul scolds the Corinthian church for not doing this exact thing. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 1 through 8, dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world will be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Do you not know that you shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? If then you have judgments concerning these pertaining to this life, do you appoint those who are at least esteemed by the church to judge? You could take the least spiritual, educated Christians, and because the Holy Spirit's in them, they can make as good or better judgments than the world can in their system. And you will find worldwide that judicial systems just do not really work. I mean, there's a percent they do work, but it seems like the longer the country's around, the less of a percent the judicial system is righteous. I say this to your shame. Is it so that there is not a wise man among you, not even one, who will be able to judge between his brethren? But brothers goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers? Now therefore, if it's already the utter failure for you that you go to law against another, why do you not rather accept wrong? Why do you not rather let yourself be cheated? No, you yourself do wrong and cheat, and you do these things to your brethren. So, besides the fact that you're wronging one another, you're wronging each other even more, forcing this thing into the world system, when the church system can do that. So it's actually in the judicial law of today that a community, or in this case, the church community, can be brought up documents where we actually become a legal court. And both sides sign the papers that whatever this court, referring to the church court, decides, they are legally bound to do it. Interesting, isn't it? That even our forefathers have set such a thing up. But again, it's rarely done today. Well, looking at verse again, in verse 2 through 4 there again, if it's at nighttime and somebody's breaking in, verse 2, and you kill that person, you're not guilty of murder. It's self-defense, and the Bible seems to say that a person should have the right to protect his property. However, it's not a carte blanche to murder people. You know, I don't like so-and-so, so I'll invite him to dinner. As soon as they walk into the house, I'll kill him and, put a bag of money in their pocket and say, look at that. It's not a carte blanche to kill people who come into your yard. And then he makes it clear, for example, it can be judged whether the person was righteously killed or whether he was murdered. And one of the ways is it's daytime. And it being daylight, he says, the sun having risen, it's the ability to protect yourself and the ability for this not to be such a scary situation. And of course, you could yell for help, or you could, there's other means. You cannot just kill him. At that point, it would have to be he's attacking you and it's self-defense or something. But if it was daylight and he's killed, it's going to go to the courts, and you're going to have to stand before the judges, and they to judge whether you're guilty of murder or not. And since it was daylight, it's going against you because of that. So once again, the thief has rights. So far, we've seen the servants, the indentured servants, they have rights. Children have rights. Remember, the parents just can't kill their children. It's got to go to the judges, and the whole community has to decide. And then we see the women have rights, and we're going to see some more of this at the end of the chapter. And now we see thieves have rights. So understand, there is no culture at this time that was even close to any of these things. And I would say even today, most cultures do not give people rights the way we do. I think maybe we've even gone overboard a little bit on that, but that's a discussion for another time. Now, again, if the object is found in his possession, then the intent is that he was stealing not out of greed, but out of need. Once again, in Proverbs 6, verse 30 to 31, people do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he is starving. Yet, when he is found, he must restore sevenfold. So he still has got to bring restitution. He may have to give up all the substance of his house. He may have to sell out of everything as poverty, even go deeper. But again, I would come back to that book of James. Mercy triumphs over judgment. And I would say this is God bringing this man and his family and his situation to light that you might help him, not persecute him and prosecute him and make it even worse. Well, now there's personal responsibility over other people's property. Now, this isn't stealing, but it's a type of stealing. Not intentional, but unintentional. In verse 5 and 6, if a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches its thorns, so that it stacked grain or standing grain or a field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. So we see purposeful things maybe, or maybe we're seeing unintentional things. But either way, it wakes people up to their personal responsibility of anything under their authority, such as an animal or an employee or a child. So it just so happens they break open the fence and they're grazing in your friend's field. And the friend comes over and says, these guys have been chewing on the field all afternoon. Then you say, get your cows over to my best field. My best field is over here, and they can chew tomorrow afternoon or all day on my field to make up for what happened today. That's what you should do without even going to the judges. That's the idea here. But again, if you're not being reasonable, then it goes to the judges, and they're going to tell you this, but you should just understand it yourself. Now, again, somebody purposely could do that, break open his fence and, oh, I'm so sorry, let me get back over here. Sorry about that, I'll try to watch it later. And there is no restitution. That could begin bitterness in your neighbor's heart. Because you wronged me by letting your cows graze that I caught one time. I don't know how many times they've grazed wrongly when I didn't catch them. On top of that, you started burning stuff and it caught fire, burnt part of my field, and no restitution's been being given for this, you see. So what is it doing? It's waking the farmer up to say, you're responsible when you make a fire. You're responsible for your animals. Your kids throw the ball and break the window. You're responsible for your children's action. You're responsible for the foolishness of an animal or the foolishness of a child or the foolishness of an employer. I don't know if you saw in the news this week, but one of the celebrities, I don't know who, their bodyguard, this person was talking stupid, dressed all weird, Probably one of those transgender type people. And they were yelling at the celebrity, and then they started mouthing off to the bodyguard of this person. And he finally just had enough and poof, punched the guy, knocked him out. And everybody's standing there going, whoa. Well, immediately a lawyer saw that, called that guy up. And are they suing the bodyguard? Yeah, but not really. They're suing the celebrity. And immediately they're talking about it in the news, and they're going, that guy's absolutely got a case. The celebrity is responsible for their bodyguard, even if it's a separate company. They're 100% responsible for that bodyguard. It's as if they themselves punched that person in the courts. And I think that could be very, very appropriate, and this according to these scriptures. So again, in the church, if you back into somebody's car, I hope that you tell them and put a note there and offer to fix it, right? Or hopefully you have insurance. I hope as a Christian we're abiding by the law that we have that ability to fix it. Well, verse 7 and 8. If a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he, the thief, shall pay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. So this is, again, you're being a good neighbor. And he said, hey, can you, I'm going to be gone out of town. Can you watch whatever? A bag of money, it sounds like. Or make sure nobody breaks into my house. Or can you watch my cat or dog these days, right? And as the guy comes back, and whatever is missing, somebody supposedly broke into the house and stole his money. And so you're going, hey, I'm so sorry. I know you came to get your money. I don't have it. It got stolen by somebody. Now, if the thief is found who stole it, it's like, yeah, somebody really did steal it. But if the thief isn't found, it goes to the judges. And the judges will decide whether this guy is just making this up and it's a story in which he steals stuff and makes it look like it was something that was out of his control or not. And the judges will decide whether or not he is liable or not. And it's interesting, we've been talking about judges, just a quick note on judges. The word judges in the Hebrew is the word Elohim. You guys remember that word? Very first of the Bible. In the beginning, Elohim made the heavens and the earth. Elohim is God plural. Remember, El is singular, Ella is dual, Elohim is three or more. And he's calling them judges, gods. Matter of fact, in Psalms 82:6, David talks about this, saying, aren't you gods? All you who are children of the Most High. And in the essence, he was saying, you judges need to realize, in a sense, you have a lot of power, like God himself. And you die, or you don't die, or you've got to pay this guy 7 times the amount or whatever it is. You got to become a slave of this guy. It affects people for life. It affects their family. It can affect an entire tribe, the way the judge makes the decision, good or bad, right? And Jesus in John 10 messes with the Pharisees, like, you can't call yourself God. You can't make yourself equal to God. And then Jesus says, doesn't Psalms 82:6 say that you are gods? So why can't we be, Jesus messes with them on this verse, utilizing this. Verse 9 through 13, for any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or a clothing, or any kind of cause both parties, you shall come before the judges. Whoever the judge condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. And if a man delivers his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or an animal to keep, watching over it for time, and it dies, is hurt, or driven away, and no one sees it, verse 11, then an oath of the Lord shall be between them both, and he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept that he shall not make it good. But if in fact it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner of it. If it is torn in pieces by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence, and he shall not take good what was torn. So, elaborating on this, whatever it could be money, or it could be an animal, whatever it is. When you say, I will watch that for you, I will take care of that for you, he's saying you are responsible from that moment. Well, I'm just being a good neighbor. I'm getting punished for, no good deed goes unpunished. I was being a good neighbor and now I'm getting punished for that. The moment you took responsibility, you are responsible. And then going back, if it's missing or you say it was stolen and it goes to court and there is no evidence. So the guy is saying, look, I went out last night, took my wife out to dinner, I came home, somebody broke into our house, not only was your money taken, but they stole some of our stuff too, and this is the story you're going with. It goes to the judges, and if you have no evidence, you have to take the word of this man as truth. You may not like it, but you need to accept it. I have no evidence, so what he says is true. Interesting, that's the way it is in our system today, again from this verse, that a person is innocent until proven guilty. And again, that's unique in our world. Right across the border in Mexico, it is plainly stated, you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent. And I have gone over to the Tijuana prison, visiting people there, Christian men who you wouldn't believe, they did basically zero, nothing. One guy literally had a bullet they found in his car. And he was put in prison, was there for years. And then when he went to court, he was guilty, because you're guilty there. And anyway, I'm just telling you that the person who is being accused has the benefit of the doubt in his favor. But yet, if there is evidence presented and it's proven that he's a thief or his story doesn't check out, then he's got to pay double. Now, if it's a lowly shepherd type of guy and he's out in the field watching another guy's sheep along with his own sheep, and one of the sheep, he said, hey, a fox came and killed it, that's why I don't have it. Well, you got to show the carcass of it. So maybe you couldn't stop the wolf from killing it, but at least you could stop him from fully eating it. And you bring back what it's ever left as evidence, and it's got to be accepted as indeed it was the truth. It's just one of those things happens. Sometimes life happens, right? It wasn't anybody's fault. It was just an animal being an animal, or a child being a child, or, the big giant wind came and knocked down everybody's barn. It wasn't. Even though I was watching your barn at the time, everybody's barn got knocked over. Things like that happen. And then in verse 14 and 15, stopping here tonight, and if a man borrows anything from his neighbor, and it becomes injured or dies, the owner of it is not being with it, he shall surely make it good. But if the owner is with it, he shall not make it good. If he was hired, it came for its hire. So 3 different situations here. You say, hey, I'm going to dig a hole. Can I borrow your shovel? And you're going, yeah, I'll grab 2 shovels. I'll come over and help dig the hole with you. And so the owner of the 2 shovels is standing there, and his shovel breaks. Well, the owner was there with it, so the guy who's borrowing it is not responsible. But if the owner's not there, and I'm using the shovel and it breaks, I have responsibility. I broke the shovel. I got to replace it with a new shovel. That's my responsibility. But if I go to my neighbor and say, can I rent that shovel? And he says, yeah, I rent it for $10 an hour. Good, I need it for 2 hours. And now while you're renting it, it breaks. Well, you're not responsible because you didn't borrow it, you rented it. And I can tell you so many stories on borrowing things. The bottom line is don't ever borrow. I mean, young people, in the church, I've just seen a lot of young people learn the hard way on this point. Oh, I could tell you some horror stories, I really could, of people that would basically talk people into borrowing stuff so they could get it back, saying, hey, where did this scratch come from? Hey, you got to buy me new tires. You got to fix my brake. The brakes didn't work the same as after I bought. And young people having to give out money for borrowing their car for a day. I've seen that happen as well. Well, again, one of these very informational messages, not very inspirational, but again, I think it does give us a mind frame. The more devotional, spiritual things are coming, guys. Hang in there. And then we'll get into building the tabernacle. Not so devotional, but we'll get through that quickly. Any questions?